I remember the first night clearly. The fog had rolled in thick, curling around the trees like slow-moving smoke, and the lake's surface was still almost glassy, reflecting pale shards of moonlight. Every step I took on the soft, damp forest floor seemed louder than the last, as though the silence itself was holding its breath. I had come to this place for solitude, for the quiet comfort of being utterly alone, but there was something in the way the shadows shifted, something that felt alive. I could hear faint rustling, a static hum, almost like whispered words carried on the wind. The campfire had long burned out, leaving only a faint glow in the lanterns, flickering as though uncertain. I told myself it was my imagination, the nerves, the isolation. Yet, with every snap of a twig, my pulse quickened, my eyes scanning the mist for shapes that shouldn't exist. Then I noticed them, eyes, gleaming and far too human, watching me from the edge of the tree line. My breath caught. The hair on my arm stood up. I wanted to leave, to run back to safety, but my legs felt heavy, rooted in the wet earth. There was something there, something patient, waiting. I had heard the stories about Skinwalkers, about their ability to mimic, to wait silently until you were alone, and now, in the stillness of the lake and the shadows of the trees, I understood. That's when I saw it. The road ended just before dusk, gravel thinning into dirt, water breathing somewhere beyond the trees. It was early fall, the kind where the air smells damp and old, like leaves that never fully dried. I parked beside the lake camp as the fog began to move in, not rolling, not drifting. It slid, low and patient, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. The trees stood close together here, tall, thin, their bark dark with moisture, cool to the eye. I stepped out of the car. Cold air brushed my neck. My breath showed, then vanished into gray. The fog thickened with each step toward the water. It pressed against my legs, soft and heavy, carrying the smell of wet soil and something faintly metallic. I paused, listened. No birds, no insects, just a quiet hush stretched too tight. That's when I noticed the whispers. Not words, not voices, more like breath moving where it shouldn't be, close to my ears, then farther away. When I turned my head, the sound slid behind me, always just out of reach. I told myself it was a fog, wind caught in branches, distant water shifting. Still my shoulders tightened, skin prickling under my jacket. I walked toward the shoreline. The ground felt uneven beneath my boots, soft with fallen needles and hidden roots. Every few steps, something moved at the edge of my vision, a darker patch in the fog, a shape where there shouldn't be one. When I looked directly, there was nothing, only trees standing too close together. They seemed to lean as I passed, not bending, just angling, as if listening. The lake appeared suddenly, a wide, flat stretch of pale gray water, perfectly still. No ripples, no wind touching its surface. The fog hovered just above it, blurring the line between air and reflection. I stepped closer, boots crunching softly against gravel and damp leaves. That's when I saw myself. At least, I thought it was me. My reflection stood in the water, dark and slightly warped. The same jacket, the same posture. I lifted my hand. The reflection hesitated, only for a moment, barely long enough to notice. Then it followed. My chest tightened, breath catching shallow and fast. I lowered my arm. The reflection stayed still a second too long before settling back into place. The fog pressing around me, cool against my face, damp against my lips. The whispers returned, closer now. They brushed along my thoughts, soft and insistent, like someone trying to remember my name. I backed away from the water, slowly, carefully. The trees creaked faintly, with shifting under unseen pressure. Somewhere to my left, a shadow slid between trunks. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear movement, just a feeling of being tracked, measured. The fog thickened again, closing off the path behind me. I could still see the lake, but the reflection was gone. The surface was empty now, flat, unmarked. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. Each inhale scraped cold air down my throat. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence. not peaceful, waiting. I stood there longer than I meant to, unable to move, afraid that if I did, something would shift again. Eventually, I forced my legs to carry me back toward the camp. The trees straightened as I passed. Or maybe they never leaned at all. The fog followed, keeping its distance, never touching me directly. Behind me, the lake remained silent, but I could feel it watching. The lanterns were stored in a weathered crate near the camp's edge, metal cold against my fingers, glass filmed with dust and age. The fog had thickened since the lake. It curled low around my ankles, carrying the smell of oil and wet wood. I lit the first lantern. A soft flame bloomed inside, casting pale light that barely pushed the mist away. Then another, and another. Small islands aglow formed around me, floating in gray nothingness. The forest stayed quiet, too quiet. When I lifted the last lantern, my hands trembled slightly. Not fear, not yet. Curiosity. I struck the match. The flame caught. At first, it burned like the others. Steady, warm. Then it flickered. Not a gentle sway. Not wind touched. It snapped. Bright, dim, bright again. The light jerked across the trees, throwing long shadows that stretched too far, then recoiled. For a brief moment, the flicker revealed something between the trunks. Tall shapes. Too narrow. Standing where there had been nothing before. I blinked. The light steadied. The shapes were gone. My breath came slow and careful. Fog dampened my lips. Oil smoke clung faintly to my clothes. I told myself it was a flame. Old wick. Uneven fuel. Still, I kept that lantern closer than the rest. As I moved down the path, the ground felt different. Softer. Less familiar. The fog pressed inward, absorbing the lantern light, until everything beyond a few feet dissolved. That's when the humming began. Low, distant, not quite sound. It vibrated gently in my chest, like a memory trying to surface. I stopped walking. The hum continued, neither louder nor quieter. I turned my head. The lantern's shadows slid across the trees. Nothing moved, and yet I felt watched. The flickering lantern snapped again. Light spilled sideways, briefly carving figures from fog. Silhouettes stood just beyond the reach of the glow. Not solid, not empty. Their edges blurred, as if the mist itself had learned the shape of a body. The hum wavered. I took one careful step back. The figures did not follow. They did not retreat. They simply waited. The lantern steadied once more. The fog closed in. I stood alone again, or so it seemed. I forced myself forward, boots brushing damp leaves, lantern swinging gently at my sides. The hum faded as I walked, replaced by a faint rustling overhead. Branches shifted without wind. Needles brushed together softly like quiet hands. The path curved ahead of me. I remembered this bend, a shallow turn toward the cabin. I followed it. After several steps, the air felt colder, sharper. The fog thinned slightly, revealing the path ahead. I stopped. The trail was wrong. The trees stood farther apart now. The ground dipped where it had once risen. I turned around. Behind me, the path no longer curved. It stretched straight into fog, narrow and unfamiliar. My lantern swayed, casting confused shadows that refused to settle. The humming returned, closer this time. It drifted from somewhere behind the trees, then from ahead, then from everywhere at once. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear breathing, only that steady vibration, threaded through the silence. I took a step back. The ground shifted slightly beneath my boot, as if settling into place. When I looked again, the path behind me had narrowed. Fog spilled across it, erasing its edges. The flickering lantern snapped violently now. Light strobed across the forest. In each flash, the silhouettes appeared again. Closer, more defined, their heads tilted at odd angles. Their limbs hung too long. Between flashes, they vanished completely. My pulse thudded in my ears. Warm breath fogged the air in front of my face. I whispered nothing. Didn't call out. The lanterns were the only proof I was still here. The flicker slowed, then stopped. Steady light returned, soft and fragile. The forest looked normal again. Trees, fog, path. But I knew the trail beneath my feet was not the one I had walked before. I stood there, listening to the last echoes of the hum fade into silence. The fog pressed closer, and somewhere in it, something had learned how to move the path. The fog followed me as I walked, not drifting away, not thinning. It stayed close to the ground, cool against my boots, soft as breath against my calves. The lantern light barely reached the trees now. Shadows stretched long and thin, pulling away from their trunks like spilled ink. They didn't move when I moved. They lagged behind, then crept forward when I stopped. I kept my eyes ahead. The path felt narrower, even though I hadn't seen it change. Each step landed with a dull hush. Needles, damp earth, something softer beneath. The mist bent the forest into unfamiliar shapes. A stump looked like a crouched figure. A low branch resembled an arm reaching out. I told myself to blink slowly, to let my eyes adjust. The shadows only grew longer. They stretched across the ground beside me, sliding forward at my pace. Then faster. I stopped walking. My shadow halted. The others did not. They slid a few inches more before settling again, as if correcting a mistake. Cold crawled up my spine. The lantern shook faintly in my grip, glass clicking softly. I listened. No footsteps. No rustling. Just a faint hum of silence, thick and heavy in my ears. Then the whisper came back, clearer this time. Not breath, not wind. My name, spoken softly, almost gently. It came from somewhere to my right, low and close, as if someone stood just beyond the fog. I turned. The lantern light swept across tree trunks and mist, revealing nothing but pale air and bark dark with moisture. My chest tightened. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I waited. The forest did not respond. I took another step forward. The whisper followed. My name again. Drawn out. Careful. It matched my pace perfectly. I sped up. The whisper stayed beside me. Never louder, never farther away. My breath grew shallow. Cold air scraped my lungs. I could feel it now. A presence. Not touching me. Not chasing. Walking. Keeping time. The shadows beside me thickened. They clung closer to my boots, stretching unnaturally far ahead. One shadow bent inward, brushing against my own. I flinched back. Nothing touched me. Still, the feeling lingered, that sense of being paced. Measured step for step. I forced myself to stop again. The whisper stopped with me. Silence pressed in, so tight it rang in my ears. Then, from just behind my shoulder, a breath. Not mine. Warm and damp against the back of my neck. Every muscle locked. My fingers went numb around the lantern handle. I didn't turn. Couldn't. The breath stayed there, hovering, matching my shallow inhale. I took one careful step forward. The breath followed. The shadows shifted again, stretching longer, climbing up the tree trunks like stains. The mist thickened ahead, swallowing the path completely. I whispered nothing. Didn't ask who was there. The forest felt too close now. Branches angled inward. Leaves brushed together softly, not stirred by wind. The presence remained just behind me, close enough that I could feel its space. Then the whisper returned. My name again, but wrong. The tone was slightly off. The rhythm uneven, as if it had learned the sound but not the meaning. I turned suddenly, lantern swinging wide. Light spilled through the fog. There was nothing there. No figure. No movement. Only the path behind me. Dark and narrow. Shadows pooled thickly at its edges. The breath was gone, but the cold remained. I stood there longer than I should have, listening for footsteps that never came. The lantern flame steadied, casting soft light that felt fragile now. I turned back toward the lake, drawn by a quiet pull I couldn't explain. As I walked, the shadows resumed their place beside me, keeping pace, never touching. The fog pressing closer, dulling sound, dulling thought. And though I was alone on the path, I knew with a certainty that made my stomach twist. Something was walking with me, silently, patiently, learning how I moved, The lake came back into view through thinning fog. Not suddenly, not clearly. It revealed itself in pieces. A strip of pale water, dark reeds bowing at the edge. The air felt colder here, heavier. It pressed against my chest with each breath. I slowed as I approached the shore. The ground softened beneath my boots, mud pulling gently, as if reluctant to let go. The fog hovered low over the water, its surface smooth and unbroken. No wind, no movement. I stopped a few feet from the edge. That's when I saw the eyes. At first, I thought they were reflections. Moonlight catching on wet leaves, dew clinging to reeds. Two pale points hovered just above the waterline. Still, unblinking, they watched from within the tall grass, half hidden, as if the reeds were learning how to hold a gaze. My breath slowed. Cold air burned faintly in my lungs. I didn't move. The eyes remained. They weren't bright, not glowing, just pale, flat, reflective in a way that felt wrong. I shifted my weight slightly. Mud squelched softly. The eyes did not flinch. A ripple spread across the lake. Small, careful. It started near the reeds, then widened in perfect circles. There was no breeze. The fog did not stir. I watched the water closely, heart thudding slow and heavy. Another ripple formed. Closer to shore this time. I swallowed. The reeds rustled faintly, though nothing touched them. The eyes blinked. Just once. When they opened again, they were closer. Not by much. Just enough to notice. My skin prickled. A chill crawled along my arms, under my sleeves. I took a step back. The water rippled again. The sound was soft, like fingers brushing silk. The eyes remained fixed on me. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, a bird. Still, something about the way they watched felt patient. I blinked. When my eyes opened, there were more. Not many. Just enough to make my chest tighten. Several pale points now dotted the reeds, spread unevenly, all facing the same direction. Facing me. The fog thickened slightly, dulling the edges of everything. I could hear my breath. Slow. Too loud. The water shifted again, ripples overlapping now, crossing in ways that didn't feel natural. Something beneath the surface moved. Not fast, not violent, measured. A darker shape passed just under the water, long and indistinct, distorting the reflection of the sky. My legs felt weak, heavy. I wanted to step away, but the air felt thick around me, resistant. The eyes blinked again. Closer. The reeds leaned inward, their thin stalks brushing together softly. No wind touched them. I raised the lantern slightly. The light trembled across the water, breaking into fragments. For a moment, the pale eyes caught the glow, reflecting it back at me. They were wrong up close. Too round, too still. They didn't shift with the light, didn't narrow. They only watched. The shape beneath the water slowed, then stopped. The ripples faded, leaving the lake unnaturally still again. Silence pressed down. I could hear a faint hum beneath it. Not sound exactly. More like pressure. The kind that settles behind your eyes. I blinked again. The eyes were closer. Now near the very edge of the water, hovering just above the surface. I could see faint outlines around them now. Not faces. More like suggestions. Contours the fog hadn't fully erased. My throat felt dry. My mouth tasted faintly metallic. I didn't speak. Didn't breathe deeply. The reeds rustled once more, and the water rippled outward, lapping softly against the shore. Something brushed against my boot. I gasped and stumbled back. Mud released me with a wet sound. The eyes did not move. They only watched me retreat. I took another step back. Then another. The fog crept between us, thickening, blurring the reeds. The pale points dimmed slightly, fading behind gray. But I could still feel them, watching, waiting. I turned away slowly, forcing my legs to move. Each step away from the shore felt heavy, as though I was leaving something unfinished. Behind me, the water rippled once more, soft, deliberate. I did not turn back again. Even as I walked, I felt it, the certainty that the eyes remained at the shore, unblinking, tracking my retreat through the fog. The forest swallowed me quickly, trees closing in, lantern light shrinking. But the lake stayed with me, cold, still, and patient enough to wait for the next time I came too close. The tent went up slower than it should have. My fingers felt clumsy, cold stiffening each movement. The clearing was small, pressed tight between trees. Fog pooled low, curling around the stakes as I drove them in. The lantern sat nearby, its pale light stretching thin, struggling against a mist. Every sound felt close. Fabric sliding, metal clicking, my own breath brushing my collar. I worked carefully, quietly. The forest did not return the favor. A faint, rustling moved just beyond the ring of light. Not steady, not frantic, patient. I paused, hand resting on the tent pole. The rustling stopped. Silence rushed in, thick and heavy. I listened harder than I should have, ears straining. Nothing. I told myself it was leaves settling, branches easing in the damp. I went back to work. The rustling returned, this time closer, not from one direction, from many. Soft movements circled the clearing, barely disturbing the fog. My skin tightened along my arms. The smell of wet earth felt stronger now, mixed with something stale. I zipped the tent halfway, the sound loud in the quiet. The rustling paused again. I waited. Fog drifted past the lantern, casting shifting shadows that slid along the tent fabric. Shapes formed, then collapsed. I finished securing the last stake and stood slowly, listening. The forest appeared still. Trees stood straight, branches unmoving. Too still. I stepped toward the lantern and lifted it. The light trembled slightly in my grip. "Hello?" stayed locked in my throat. I took a cautious step outside the clearing. The fog thinned just enough to show tree trunks and dark ground. Nothing else. No movement. No figures. But the feeling remained. That sense of being encircled, measured from all sides. I turned in a slow circle. Each rotation felt wrong, like I was always half a second behind something else. The lantern light brushed over the trees, and shadows flickered between them, too quick to follow. Too slow to ignore. A branch snapped softly somewhere behind me. I spun. Only darkness and fog. My heartbeat thudded low and heavy, echoing in my ears. I backed toward the tent, boots dragging slightly through damp leaves. The rustling returned, closer now, skimming just beyond the light. It wasn't footsteps. No rhythm. No, wait, just movement without purpose. I ducked into the tent and zipped it shut, the sound tearing through the quiet. Inside, the air felt stale and tight. The thin fabric glowed faintly with lantern light, casting shadows from outside. They slid along the walls. Paused. Shifted. I sat still, knees pulled in, lantern resting between them. The rustling moved again, circling, sometimes close enough that the tent wall dimpled inward slightly, as if brushed by passing air. I held my breath. The movement stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a soft scrape along the ground. Slow, deliberate. It traced the perimeter of the tent, never pressing too hard, never breaking the surface. My pulse hammered in my chest. Warm breath fogged the air inside the tent. The lantern flame wavered, but did not go out. The scrape ended behind me. Silence followed. Not relief, not safety, expectation. I stayed frozen, counting my breaths, waiting for the next sound. None came. The fog outside thickened, dulling even the faint outlines of trees. The shadows faded. Eventually, the feeling of being circled loosened slightly. Not gone, just patient. I lay back slowly, eyes fixed on the glowing fabric above me. The forest remained quiet. But I knew, whatever had moved around my tent had not left. It had simply settled in, close enough to wait, and far enough that I couldn't see it. The cabin sat farther back from the shore than I remembered, half hidden by trees, dark with age and moisture. The door opened with a soft groan, like it hadn't been used in a long time. Cool air spilled out, smelling of dust and old rain. Inside, the fog lingered at the threshold, unwilling to cross fully, as if respecting something unspoken. I stepped in anyway. The floorboards were dry, but cold beneath my boots. Every step settled slowly, with sighing under my weight. The lantern's glow filled the room, just enough to see shapes. A narrow table, 2 chairs, a small mirror fixed to the wall near the back. The cabin felt empty, but not abandoned. Silence rested here differently. Thicker, heavier. I set the lantern down and shrugged off my jacket. The air brushed my skin like damp fingers. That's when I noticed the mirror. Its surface was clouded, edges chipped, glass fogged faintly from the cold. Beyond it, through the reflection, I could see the fog outside the cabin windows. And something else. At first, I thought it was my own shape, distorted by the glass. I stepped closer. The reflection stepped too. Same posture, same slow movement. But the fog in the mirror moved differently. It curled and folded in ways the real fog did not. Thicker, intentional. I raised my hand. The reflection followed. Perfectly. Too perfectly. I lowered my arm and leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. The reflection did the same, but its breath lingered longer, smearing the surface unevenly. My pulse ticked slow and heavy in my ears. I turned away sharply. The cabin behind me stood still. Quiet. Empty. No movement. No sound. I exhaled and forced a slow breath, then turned back to mirror. The reflection stared at me. Not my eyes. Its eyes. Too pale. Too flat. They did not blink when mine did. Cold slid down my spine. I took a step back. The reflection hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Then it moved again, adjusting, correcting itself. My mouth went dry. I shifted to the left. The reflection lagged, then slid into place. Smooth but delayed, as if it were learning. I turned away again, heart thudding louder now. The cabin felt smaller, closer. I could hear my breathing, and something faint beneath it, a soft hum, low and steady, vibrating through the floorboards. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection had not turned away when I did. It still faced forward, still watching, its head tilted slightly, an angle my neck had not taken. I stepped back again, heel brushing against a chair leg. The scrape sounded sharp in the quiet. In the mirror, the reflection smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just enough. I froze. My skin prickled, arms tightening instinctively. The hum grew stronger, pressing behind my eyes. I whispered nothing, didn't speak. Slowly, I turned my head away from the mirror. When I looked back again, the glass showed only the cabin behind me. Empty. No figure. No movement. Just fog drifting past the windows. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The hum softened, sliding back into silence. I took another cautious step closer to the mirror. My reflection stared back. Normal. Tired. Pale from the cold. I lifted my hand. The reflection followed. Perfectly. I waited. No delay. No hesitation. Still, I didn't trust it. I turned my back, fully this time, and walked toward the door. Halfway there, I felt it. A shift, not behind me. Inside the room. I stopped. The floorboards creaked softly. The lantern flickered once. I turned slowly. The mirror reflected the fog again, and a figure behind me. Not touching. Not close. Standing where I had been moments before. It mimicked my posture, my stance, the slight tilt of my head, but its edges blurred, as if the glass couldn't hold it properly. I felt cold bloom in my chest. I stepped forward. The figure in the mirror stepped forward too. I stepped sideways. It followed, still delayed, still correcting. I spun around. The cabin behind me was empty. The hum returned, faint but insistent. I faced the mirror once more. The reflection leaned closer than I had, its face pressed near glass, eyes pale, unblinking. I backed away slowly. The figure did not retreat. It stayed where it was, watching me leave. I grabbed a lantern and rushed for the door. Cold air hit my face as I stepped outside. Fog swallowed the cabin's outline almost immediately. Behind me, through the window, the mirror caught the lantern light. For just a moment, I saw the reflection raise its hand. Not waving, not reaching, just learning the shape of goodbye. I didn't look again. I walked back toward the camp, heart racing, breath shallow. The fog closed in, soft and quiet. But with every step, I felt it, that sense of being mirrored, as if somewhere nearby, something was practicing how to move like me, waiting for the moment it would no longer need the glass. The dock creaked under my weight. Old wood, damp and soft with age. Fog clung low to the water, erasing the far end of the lake. The boards felt colder here, as if the lake breathed through them. I stood still for a moment, lantern held low, light trembling across the planks. The water was too calm. No insects skimming the surface. No distant ripples. Just a flat stretch of pale darkness. I stepped closer to the edge. The fog parted slightly, revealing the lake beneath. Smooth, unbroken. That's when I heard it. My name, soft, drawn out, carried across the water. It didn't echo. It didn't fade. It hovered, as if the lake itself was holding the sound. I froze. The boards creaked faintly beneath my boots, complaining at the shift of my weight. The voice came again. Closer, not louder, clearer. I leaned forward without meaning to, breath held tight in my chest. The lantern light skimmed the water's surface, breaking into long, pale streaks. The lake remained still, too still. A faint ripple formed near the center, small and deliberate. Then another. They spread outward in perfect circles, overlapping gently. Something moved beneath them. Not fast, not sudden. A darker shape slid just under the surface, distorting the reflection of the fog above. My pulse thudded heavy in my ears. The voice returned. My name again, but wrong. The tone was uneven. The rhythm stretched as if it had been practiced. I took a step back. The dock creaked louder this time. The ripples stopped. Silence rushed in, thick and pressing. I stood frozen, listening. The water began to move again. Slow ripples crept toward the dock, lapping softly against the wood. I could feel the vibration through my boots. Cold air brushed my face. The fog felt heavier here, damp against my eyelashes. I leaned closer despite myself. The shadow beneath the surface passed directly under the dock. The water darkened briefly, then cleared. I sucked in a sharp breath. The voice whispered again, now so close it felt like it brushed my thoughts. I couldn't tell if it came from the water or from just behind me. My chest tightened painfully. I did not turn. The lantern flickered, light wavering across the lake. For a moment, I saw something pale beneath the surface. Not a shape, more like a suggestion of one. It moved slowly, as if dragging itself along the bottom. The ripples grew wider, lapping against the dock with quiet persistence. My name came again, closer, almost gentle. I stepped back another pace. The voice stopped. The water stilled. Everything held its breath. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. Instead, a shadow passed directly beneath the planks at my feet. The boards creaked sharply, as if something brushed against them from below. I gasped and stumbled back, lantern swinging wildly. Light shattered across the fog. The water beneath the dock rippled once more, then slowly smoothed. Silence pressed in again. The fog thickened, blurring the lake's surface until it became a blank slate. I backed away from the edge, each step careful, deliberate. The dock groaned softly as I retreated. The voice did not follow, but I could feel it, waiting beneath the water, listening, learning the sound of my steps. When I reached the shore, I turned once more. The dock stretched into fog, empty and still. The lake lay quiet again, but the calm felt staged, temporary, as if whatever moved beneath the surface had simply slipped deeper. I walked away slowly, the lantern light shrinking behind me. Behind my thoughts, my name echoed faintly, not spoken, remembered, and carried by something that had learned exactly how to say it. The campfire should have been dead. I remembered watching it fade earlier, embers sinking low, orange light thinning into ash. But when I stepped into the clearing, a glow waited for me. Small, unsteady, familiar. The fire had reignited on its own. Flames licked upward slowly, casting pale light that trembled against the fog. Smoke rose straight up, then vanished without drifting. The warmth reached my face, gentle and comforting, almost kind. I stood still, listening. The forest remained quiet. No rustling, no hum, just the soft crackle of its settling. I moved closer. The firelight stretched shadows across the clearing, long and soft-edged, swaying even though there was no wind. That's when I saw the figure. It stood just beyond the fire, half lit, half lost in shadow. My breath caught. The shape was unmistakable. The slope of the shoulders, the familiar posture, the way the head tilted slightly to one side. Someone I hadn't seen in years. Someone I hadn't thought about until that exact moment. The warmth from the fire suddenly felt heavier, pressing against my chest. I took a slow step forward. The figure did not move. The fire flared slightly, casting clearer light across the clearing. The face came into view. It looked right, too right. Same eyes, same mouth, but there was no expression there. No smile, no recognition. Just a steady, unblinking stare. My skin prickled. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. No words came. The figure remained silent, hands resting loosely at its sides. The fog curled around its legs, never rising above the knees. I took another step. The fire popped softly. Shadows shifted. For a moment, the figure flickered, not disappearing, just thinning, like an image stretched too far. Then it steadied again. The eyes never left me. I searched the face for something familiar, a crease, a habit. There was nothing, only the shape of memory, worn like a mask. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp leaves. The warmth brushed my hands, real enough to trust. I waited for the figure to speak. It didn't. The silence stretched, longer than it should have. I realized then that it wasn't breathing. Its chest did not rise, did not fall. The fire crackled again, and the flames dipped suddenly, shrinking low. The light dimmed. The figure wavered. Its edges blurred, as if the darkness were pulling it apart. I stepped back instinctively. The fire flared once more, and the figure sharpened again. Still watching, still silent. The feeling settled in slowly. This wasn't someone who had come to find me. It was something that had been waiting to be recognized. The fire's warmth began to fade. Cold crept back into my fingers. The flames lowered again, more ash than light now. The figure flickered violently. For a split second, its face shifted, not changing entirely, just misaligned. The eyes sat too far apart. The mouth lingered a fraction of a second behind the rest of the face, like a memory recalled incorrectly. The fire dimmed further. The figure began to dissolve with it, breaking into shadows that stretched toward the trees. I held my breath. The clearing felt suddenly vast, emptier than before. The flames shrank to embers. The figure vanished. No movement, no retreat, just gone. The fire collapsed inward with a soft hiss, leaving only smoke and dull orange coals. Cold rushed in immediately, settling over my skin. I stood there, staring at the empty space beyond the fire. The fog crept closer, spilling into the clearing, filling the gap where the figure had stood. I waited for something else to happen. Nothing did. No footsteps, no whisper, just the soft settling of ash. I crouched near the fire, holding my hands out to the fading warmth. The embers shifted slightly, glowing brighter for a moment. In their glow, shapes formed, faces, not clear, not whole, just impressions, suggestions, familiar in ways I didn't want to examine. They faded as quickly as they appeared. The embers cooled. The clearing darkened. I stood slowly, backing away from the fire. The fog close, and again, erasing the far edge of the trees. I didn't look for the figure. I already knew it wouldn't be there. As I turned toward the tent, a thought pressed quietly into my mind. It hadn't spoken, because it didn't need to. It had already learned what I looked like when I missed someone, and that was enough. The fire died completely behind me. No warmth followed, but the feeling did, that somewhere in the fog, something had tried on a familiar shape and had found it fit just well enough to be dangerous. Night pressed down fully now. Not dark, dense. The fog thickened until it felt touchable, cool against my wrists, damp along my jaw. I left the clearing slowly, lantern held low, light barely reaching my feet. The forest had changed again, not in shape, in attitude. It felt closer, more attentive. My boots sank softly into ground, each step muffled by wet soil and pine needles. Then I heard it, a footstep, not ahead, not to the side, behind me, soft, careful. I stopped. The sound stopped with me. Silence swelled, stretching tight enough to ache. I waited. My breath came slow, fogging the air in front of my face. No rustling, no hum, just a faint pressure of being observed. I took one step forward. A footstep followed. Perfectly timed, perfectly spaced. My skin tightened along my arms. I walked again, slowly. The footsteps stayed with me, never closer, never farther away, always matching. I listened harder. The sound was wrong. Too light for boots, too even for bare feet. No drag, no stumble, just a careful imitation of movement. I sped up. The footsteps sped up too, still matched, still measured. Fog brushed my cheeks as I turned my head slightly, trying to catch movement in the corner of my eye. Nothing, only tree trunks sliding past, their shadows stretched thin by the lantern light. I stopped suddenly. The footsteps stopped, right behind me, close enough that I felt it, like pressure against my back. Cold crept between my shoulders. I didn't turn. My heartbeat thudded slow and heavy, each pulse echoing in my ears. The forest held still. Even the fog seemed to pause, as if listening. I took a shallow breath. So, did it. Not loud, not obvious, just enough. Warm air brushed the back of my neck. I stepped forward again, every muscle tight. The footsteps returned, perfectly aligned with mine. Left, right, left, right. I veered slightly off the path, testing the ground. The footsteps adjusted instantly. No hesitation. The realization settled in quietly. It wasn't following me. It was walking as me. I swallowed hard. The lantern flickered once, casting shadows that jumped and twisted between the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw a second shadow beside my own, longer, thinner. Then the light steadied, and it was gone. The footsteps continued. I turned my head sharply. Only fog, only trees. No shape, no figure. But the sound stayed. I whispered nothing, didn't call out. The forest felt too close for words. I slowed my pace deliberately. The footsteps slowed too, still matched, still precise. My breath grew uneven, cold air scraping my lungs. I stepped to the side abruptly. The footsteps followed. No delay, no mistake. My stomach tightened painfully. I stopped again. The footsteps stopped, right behind me, close enough now that I could feel warmth through the fog. Not touching, hovering. I stood there, frozen, lantern shaking faintly in my grip. The fog thickened around my legs, curling upward like low smoke. I waited for it to move. It didn't. I waited for it to touch me. It didn't. The footsteps resumed on their own. One step. But I hadn't moved. Cold rushed through my chest. Another step followed. Still not mine. I forced myself to walk. The sound slipped back into perfect sync, as if correcting an error. The path ahead narrowed. Trees leaning inward, branches knitting shadows together overhead. The lantern light felt trapped, unable to escape the fog. I could feel sweat cooling along my spine. Despite the cold, The footsteps never wavered, never grew tired, never made a mistake. I tried to change my rhythm. Short steps, long steps, a pause mid-stride. The sound matched every change flawlessly. My mouth tasted faintly metallic. I slowed to a near stop. So, did it. I stopped completely. The footsteps stopped. Silence poured in again, thick and heavy. Then, a breath, directly behind my ear. Not whispered, not spoken. Just air. I felt it move my hair, slightly. My pulse slammed hard once, then steadied. I did not turn. I knew better. The footsteps began again. But this time, they started half a step ahead of me. I froze. The sound continued. Walking, moving forward into the fog, as if something had stepped past me. My chest tightened sharply. I stood there, lantern shaking, watching the path ahead. The fog shifted. For a brief moment, I saw a shape form where the footsteps moved. Not solid, just an outline. Too familiar. It walked exactly the way I did. Then the fog closed again. The footsteps faded slowly, each one softer than the last, until there were none. I stood alone on the path, heart pounding, breath ragged. The forest resumed its quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I knew, whatever had walked behind me had learned enough, and whatever had walked ahead was practicing being me. The trees grew closer together the farther I walked, not crowding, leaning. Their branches arched overhead, weaving shadow into shapes that felt intentional. The fog thinned slightly here, just enough to see between trunks, just enough to notice the eyes. They watched from the branches. At first, I thought they were knots in the wood, dark hollows where limbs had broken away. Then one blinked, slow, deliberate. My breath caught low in my chest. The lantern light lifted instinctively, spilling pale glow upward. More appeared. Pairs of hollow shapes stared back, unblinking, set deep into the bark itself. They weren't bright. They didn't shine. They absorbed the light, drinking it in without reflection. I stood very still. The forest seemed to breathe around me, leaves brushing softly together. With creaking faintly, the eyes remained open. Patient, I took a careful step forward. The branches shifted, not from wind, from weight. Several limbs bent slightly, drawing closer together overhead. The shadows they cast lengthened, stretching across the ground in thin, uneven lines. I felt small beneath them, watched from every angle. The lantern trembled in my hand. Light flickered across bark and fog, and for a moment, the eyes seemed to multiply. Some sat high above me, others lower, peering from between roots and tangled undergrowth. None blinked. None looked away. I swallowed, throat dry. The path beneath my boots felt wrong now. Too soft, too yielding, like walking across something that could feel me. I stepped again. The trees leaned closer, not bending, inclining. Their trunks curved just enough to suggest shoulders, ribs. Human shapes pressed into wood. My skin prickled violently. I raised the lantern higher. The light carved figures from the darkness. I saw it then. The forest wasn't filled with watchers. It was shaping itself into them. Branches crossed like folded arms, not settled into empty eye sockets. Twisted roots mimicked legs half hidden in soil. They stood motionless, frozen in the act of observing. The fog drifted between them, softening their outlines, making it easier to mistake them for trees, until you looked too long. A faint hum returned, low and steady, vibrating to the trunks and into my chest. It wasn't coming from one place. It was everywhere. I felt it in my teeth. Behind my eyes, I stopped moving. The forest held its shape. The eyes did not blink. I realized then that the silence was an absence. It was attention. The lantern flickered. For a split second, the light dimmed enough that the eyes disappeared. My heart slammed painfully. Then the flame steadied. The eyes returned. Closer, not because they had moved, because I had. I hadn't realized I had taken another step. My body moved without permission, drawn forward by something quiet and insistent. I forced myself to stop again. The hum softened, as if disappointed. Cold crept into my fingers. I felt the weight of the forest's gaze settle fully on me. Every branch, every trunk, watching, remembering, learning the exact way I stood when I was afraid. I lowered the lantern slowly. The light fell back to the ground, breaking the spell of faces. The trees looked like trees again. Mostly, but I could still feel the eyes. I backed away carefully, boots dragging slightly through the soil. The branches overhead relaxed. Just a fraction. The hum faded back into ground. I turned and walked away, never letting the lantern dip too low. Behind me, the forest did not follow. It didn't need to. It had already seen me. And I understood something then, as the fog closed in around the path. The woods weren't hostile. They were curious. And whatever learns by watching long enough eventually learns how to act. The trail was there when I woke. Not worn, not broken in, just waiting. It curved too close to my tent. Fog pressed neatly along its edges, as if outlining something deliberate. Each step I took felt absorbed. No echo, no return. The forest leaned inward, branches arching like ribs, holding their breath as I passed. I wanted to stop. I didn't. The path wanted movement, and I gave it that. The fog stopped behaving like fog. It shifted sideways. Reached. Shapes formed and unraveled at my knees, guiding rather than blocking. It flowed ahead of me, then waited. When I hesitated, it pressed gently at my back. The lake appeared and vanished again, like a reminder. I understood then. The mist was not hiding the way. It was choosing it. No wind touched the trees. Still, shadows moved. They slid across bark and ground, mirroring gestures I hadn't made yet. When I stopped, they continued. I felt studied, not hunted, like something learning patience by watching me fail at it. Breathing followed mine. Too close. Not louder. Not faster. Perfect. I slowed. It slowed. I held my breath. It waited. The intimacy of it hollowed my chest. Whatever stood behind me knew my rhythm better than I did. Moonlight spilled wrong across the water. Too bright. Too arranged. Ripples formed letters I couldn't read, but somehow understood. My reflection moved without me. Paused when I didn't. The lake was not showing me myself. It was rehearsing. The reeds parted without touch. Eyes hovered within. They blinked out of sequence. Learning. I stood still, and so did they. Not fear in them. Interest. Like an audience deciding when to applaud. The fire was gone when I woke. No smoke. No warmth. The embers spelled faces briefly, then collapsed into ash. They looked familiar. Almost. I didn't search for wood. I knew it wouldn't help. The hum returned inside my chest. Not heard. Felt. It pulled without force, vibrating through bone. When I followed it, it vanished. Silence replaced it. Thicker than before. Disappointment lingered in the air. Water showed me walking wrong. Posture off. Smile delayed. I stared until my head ached. One of us blinked late. I stopped trusting mirrors after that. Everywhere I went, something moved. Never enough to see. Always enough to feel. Leaves. Branches. Air. Tracking. I was no longer alone in motion. My voice whispered my name. Soft. Convincing. But it held the pauses wrong. Like someone copying handwriting without knowing the language. I didn't answer. That felt like a mistake. Figures gathered at the edge of sight. Still, endless. Their eyes did not dry, did not shift. Looking away hurt. Looking longer felt worse. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to change. The footsteps stopped. The breath stayed. Cold and patient at my neck. It knew where I would go next. So, did I. The forest finished forming them. Arms. Spines. Heads tilted like mine. They didn't move. They didn't need to. I was surrounded by attempts. At the lake, my face waited. Wrong in ways only I could see. The fog closed in gentle as sleep. I understood then. The forest never takes you. It lets you leave. Just not alone anymore.